her leadership and support to make this community chat happen. Dr. Pearson is an assistant professor at North Carolina State University, and she's also the Diversity Committee Chair at DADD. I'd also like to thank my colleagues and fellow DEI student liaisons who helped me bring this all together. Emily Stover, doctoral student at Florida State University, and Janet Enriquez, doctoral student at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Janet's also here today to help moderate the chat and help us work out any tech glitches. She's our backup host, so thank you, Janet. Again, please feel free to use the chat throughout. We will address everything at the very end. Before we go any further, I want to take another moment to ask one of our panelists, Will Freed, to lead us in an acknowledgement for a leader in the disability rights field who recently passed. Will?
Thank you, Melanie, and just all the participants for being here today. I'm just going to give my short reflection on one leader that's paved the way for so many people in the disability community and myself as a person with a disability. So just as a community, we come together to grow and learn as we build collective energy to feel empowered by a champion and advocate, Lois Curtis, who died at the age of 55 on November 3rd. Lois Curtis paved the way as a champion for the disability community so people with disabilities can be free from living in institutions. Lois grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, where she was institutionalized at age 11. She fought for years to be released from an institution, to be able to receive services in the community, which led to the 1999 Supreme Court case of Olmstead versus LC that allowed people with disabilities to receive services in the community. As a community, we are here to build off the strength of what Lois Curtis has done by enabling self-determination in ourselves to ensure that people with disabilities are valued members of society. Thank you.
Thank you, Will, for leading that. I'm going to go ahead and share the results of our poll. Just about everyone has done it. I think I can, let me see. I think folks should be able to see it now. So we have a really nice, diverse group of folks in our audience as well. This is great. So we can go ahead and dive in to what our talk today is going to be about. I'll start first by introducing myself. As I briefly mentioned, I'm a student liaison for DADD. I'm also a third-year PhD student in special education at the University of Illinois. And I'm also a former practicing behavior analyst who worked in homes, schools, and clinical settings all around the world for about 10 years. Also, on a more personal note, I'm also the older sister of an autistic gentleman who also has intellectual disability. And I also receive academic accommodations to support me in school with my learning disability. So like the rest of the members of this panel, as you'll soon learn, I wear many hats. So now we can go into our panel. I'm going to invite you all to introduce yourselves and share why you're a part of this panel today. And I'm just going to go left to right. And Alex, you're first.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. So excited to have this conversation with the fellow panelists. Hi, my name is Alex Newson. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Oregon and a special education teacher. I've been in education for over 7 years, both in public and private school settings for students with a wide variety of needs, talents, and skills. On a personal note, I am a late diagnosed autistic woman, and I have an autistic sibling and am surrounded by neurodivergence every day.
Thank you, Alex. Katie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie. My pronouns are she, they, and I am a Hispanic and Latina non-binary femme person. I'm a fourth-year student at University of Oregon with Alex, and let's see. I worked in clinics with autistic folks, and then also as a teacher with autistic folks, mostly with children, but also with teenagers. And let's see. Oh, my identities, right. I am, once again, I am non-binary. I am Hispanic and Latina, and I have ADHD. I was diagnosed just last year. And I also have several close family members and friends who are autistic.
Thank you, Katie. Maria?
Hello, everyone. I am Maria Davis Pierre. I am a Black woman. I am the founder of Autism in Black Inc., which aims to support Black parents who are raising autistic children. And we also work with organizations on reducing harm to the Black disability community. I am a late diagnosed autistic person. I also have ADHD, which I did get diagnosed with early on. I have 2 children who are autistic and 1 who has ADHD. And also, I am a second-year student, PhD student at Nova Southeastern University for special education.
Thank you, Maria. Will?
My name is Will Freed. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am someone that identifies on the autism spectrum and have been someone that got diagnosed at age 16. What brings me as well personally and professionally is that I'm in my 3rd year working in disability services and higher education, where I support a lot of students that are neurodivergent, ADHD, that are on the autism spectrum themselves, as well as being a national disability advocate, as someone on the autism spectrum, and having a lot of close social relationships with the autistic and neurodivergent community.
Thank you so much, Will, and thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. We have a really amazing panel today. So we'll go ahead and just dive right into some questions. The first question is specifically for panelists who identify as being on the autism spectrum or autistic. What do you wish your childhood teachers or other adult helpers would have done differently to support you as young autistic children? And Maria, you can go ahead and start.
Sure. As I said, I received my diagnosis in adulthood. But what I really wish that educators, teachers would take into consideration is that, especially for the Black community, getting an actual diagnosis is a privilege. So not everyone in your class may have a categorization or a diagnosis. They may not have accommodations and support, but that doesn't mean that they don't need them. So take that into consideration when dealing with your students, because not everybody is going to have that official diagnosis or categorization. I didn't get mine, my ADHD diagnosis until I was in undergrad. So I was like 19, and I got my autism diagnosis in March at 38. So to say, the least that I went all of this time without accommodations when I definitely needed them. But it's a privilege in our community. So take that into consideration and give your students some grace.
Thank you, Maria. Will, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so sure. So some of the things that I just always think is, like, as I reflect with this question, is being someone like on the autism spectrum, like when I was in K-12 education, I was someone that was very smart, had a lot of passion for learning, but had to overcome some social obstacles where, like, a lot of my classmates would tease me because of behaviors that I had when I was younger. And one of the things that I wish more a lot of the time was having general educators that would be more your ally and would be able to speak up for the ignorance that goes on towards your neurotypical peers. I think it's something, so someone like myself could be able to have a sense of belonging. And it's just put a lot of reflection on what I do, and personally, professionally, why I work like in this field of higher education, so people with disabilities on the autism spectrum and neurodivergence have the opportunity to have someone like them that's going to that is experienced, who has been in their shoes.
Thank you, Will. Alex?
I, like Maria, was late diagnosed, but what I loved about school was that I was able to be a part of learning. I loved learning, like Will said, that was one of my major passions. And I was an intelligent, well-spoken, but quiet and well-behaved child. And often those students who are quiet and well-behaved are overlooked, even though they may need accommodations or supports to be successful. So what I would wish is that teachers, just to kind of reiterate what Maria said, that teachers would take a look at how to make spaces neurodiverse affirming for all students, and those practices work for all students. And to understand that it takes a lot of effort and masking for students to be in this space and to act, quote unquote, big quotations here, normal or neurotypical. And so I wish that teachers would recognize how much effort it took me to mask and to do that all day, and to understand while I was performing well and getting good grades, internally, I was an anxious mess, and I needed to be told really explicitly it was okay to be my authentic self, and it was okay to make mistakes. Those are things that are part of the learning process. So that's what I think I would have loved to know.
Thank you so much. Alex, would you mind, you used a word there, masking. Would you mind defining that for folks who may not be familiar with that?
Of course. Thank you for calling that out, Melanie. I really appreciate it. Masking, in my definition, and you might find many definitions on the internet or from other autistic advocates and neurodivergent advocates, is when a person masks or performs in a different way or acts a different way in order to be accepted by those around them, or whatever the majority is in that behavior. So for autistic folks, it's acting more neurotypical and masking or covering up other parts of themselves. And that could be stimming or self-stimulatory behavior. That could be any type of behavior that's seen odd, different, weird, or out of the norm. So masking is kind of like actually putting a mask on, figuratively, to make sure that you're fitting in with the larger majority group. And other groups do this, but specific to autism, that's what this masking is about.
Thank you. That was a really great definition. And panelists, at any time, if any of you want to respond to each other, I'll purposefully pause a little bit before we move into another question. So please feel comfortable just to chime in if you feel so inclined. Our next question is targeted to the family member perspective. So that's still most of you. So as family members, you had an up-close view of your loved one going through school. How did their experiences in their educational environment impact your approach as a disability professional? And how about we start with Katie?
Sure. So I have a very close family member who was diagnosed as autistic a few years ago. And specifically for him, I feel like I had already been in the field for some time before he was diagnosed. And I feel like the only thing that kind of changed for me in terms of how I viewed just my perspective on the services that I was providing and just my understanding of autism as a whole, it just gave me that more personal connection, and also gave me that personal piece of, okay, this is, I think being a little bit more critical of the services that we were providing, knowing that, okay, these services and these things that I'm doing are also things that are happening directly to my family member. And not to say that, in full disclosure, I should we should always have that kind of lens, but it was a big impact for me. And I'm very thankful that he has great teachers. He is also in a bilingual class, and the small class size is really beneficial for him. So I feel like that, if anything, has given him a lot of support. And so, yeah, I'm really thankful so far he's still a little one. So far, I'm really happy with how everything has been going.
Thank you so much for sharing, Katie. I think it could be just as a personal side. I think as professionals who do have this, an intimate connection to it in whatever way, it can be really easy to be hard on yourself when you learn something maybe and you realize that in the past your practice wasn't as good as it could have been. But that's why we're here today. We're learning from each other and with each other, and I appreciate you sharing that. So thank you. How about Alex? Would you like to address that question as well?
Sure. My sibling was diagnosed when we both were in elementary school. And back when he was diagnosed, there was not a lot of supports or services available. There was a lot of stigma and misunderstanding around that. And that was difficult for myself, my family, and for my sibling. And so he is the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing right now. He is the reason that I make sure I not only speak about my voice, but I often consult him in things that I'm doing to get a different perspective, because his experience is different than mine. The common saying, you meet one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So I like hearing different perspectives. But I think that based on the struggles that we face as a family and him individually, and me having to be, I'm the older sibling, because I was the advocate for him, for better or for worse, that gave me the skills and the confidence to be able to move forward in my education and be a special education teacher, and then be a doctoral student in special education, so that I can make sure that those experiences don't happen to other families, and those experiences are lessons learned that I can provide information to other individuals.
Thank you, Alex. Maria?
As I said, I have 3 children. My oldest is 10, and then I have a set of twins who are 7. My oldest is the reason there is an Autism in Black. In going through her journey to get her diagnosis, it was very difficult. I am a licensed clinician. My husband is a physician. And we were in the rooms with our colleagues trying to get her diagnosis, but there was a lot of not listening to us, and it had to do with racial bias. The reason that I started Autism in Black is because Black parents do not get that support. The information is not given to our communities when it comes to autism and other developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities and things of that nature. And we're not supported, and people don't understand that it is quite different for us navigating the different intersections of our being. So she is the reason that I started Autism in Black. And then as for my twins, they're the reason I'm in my current PhD program. My son, we went through a lot of their boy-girl twins. For my son, he is the one who is autistic and has ADHD. His sister has ADHD, and she's also gifted. And they have, we went through quite a lot in the school system with them. For my son, he is a tall, larger little Black boy. And people will look at him and think he's older. They adultify him. He had, a lot of interactions with teachers that were not good. And it was because there was no culturally responsive trainings going on in the school. As for my daughter, she is gifted. She has a high IQ. She also has ADHD. And she also, they both have early birthdays. People look at high IQ and do not understand that emotional intelligence is still on the age of that person. So yes, she is able to do do a lot, but she still is a 7-year-old and needs, quite a bit of regulation. And then you add in her disability, we need quite a bit more. So they are the reason that I started my PhD program, just to make sure that I can go into and continue to go into schools and train from a culturally responsive curriculum, because it's needed. When you're looking at Black children, a lot of times that bias gets in the way, and we don't even get to the point that we have disabilities, because people are looking at our skin, and then there comes in biases that we have to navigate. So for my children, they are the reason that I do what I do every day.
I just wanted to second Maria's experience, that I feel like when I was considering this question, it's asking specifically in educational environments, but Maria brought up a good point that the process of having my family member diagnosed as someone who has a completely Hispanic family, he himself is Hispanic, was incredibly difficult. And just from what I know and in the field, he was diagnosed much later than the average, and at the average age of diagnosis. And it was, I just kind of second that frustration of no one is listening to us. No one, we keep hearing these other diagnostic terms that I felt like were inaccurate, and were just kind of like placeholders. And no one was listening to us until eventually there was some change, and suddenly, he got his diagnosis. And I was happy that he got his diagnosis so he could be eligible for services in his school, and so his teachers could be more aware. But also it was disappointing knowing that, okay, we've been saying this whole time, but years later, now you're finally seeing what we see.
Thank you all so much for sharing. We're going to do a little bit of a shift now, hopefully to hear some positives, some things that I know we have a lot of educators and practitioners in our audience. So for the self-advocates, what were some things that your childhood teachers or other adult helpers did that had a lasting positive impact on you? Sorry, and we can go ahead and start with Will.
Yeah, so just as I think about this question, I always reflect and think about what makes me thrive, what makes me be me, what makes me be the source of strength for myself, and others, and not and enjoy having the enthusiasm for what I get to do every day. And this just goes back from one of my high school teachers at Walt Whitman High School in Bethesda, Maryland, who started teaching me biology as a 15-year-old freshman in high school, who I had for multiple science classes throughout my high school time, and really just shined a lot of light and strength on me, and told me just when I wanted to answer questions in the class about that first day, how much like enthusiasm I brought to my class for what I did, for my love for learning, and it really like translated that like I was building some shed for myself to show that I have a caring teacher and educator. And this all put me now on the path where I'm supporting students with disabilities in higher education, because she told me how I had a gift for helping other people. I'm sharing things through my story, but also helping people with disabilities, disabled students, know that they're paving a way and a path for others, and they're building off of what other people with disabilities have done before them, and know that they have someone that cares for them and can help them lead to what other path and journey they want to go.
Thank you, Will. Alex, would you like to comment?
Yes. One of the reasons I became an educator was because I had many outstanding teachers who took the time to get to know me, and not just know me in the classroom, but know my interests outside of school. So, and me personally. So they got to know my sense of humor and the way that I told jokes. They took interest in the books that I was reading and asked me questions about that. They made me feel like I was belonged, that I was valued, and that I was important, and that I could be my authentic self in that space, and no one was going to harm me or I felt like I was out of place. I understand the privilege of that statement because I'm also a white woman and I was also taught by white teachers. So I understand the privilege of that. But I think that's what made the biggest impact in education, was being seen and feeling like I was heard.
Thank you, Alex. Maria?
I hate to be the Debbie Downer on this question, but I don't have any educators that stick out for me as a student, for me personally, when I was going through school. I didn't have that experience. I just did what I needed to do and, got out of school, so there wasn't any particular person education-wise that stood out to me. And it sucks that I didn't have that experience, and I make sure my children have that experience. So luckily, when you get to that part, I'll be more of on the good side of that question. But as for me, I didn't have that experience.
I think we can go ahead and just jump right to that part then, Maria, and you can lead us with that. So what recommendations would you have for educators who are supporting young autistic people?
The one thing that I appreciate about my children's teacher, they've all had great experience, minus maybe 3 teachers. For my son, his kindergarten teacher was very impactful. She understood that because of the pandemic, that his diagnosis was really taking a while to get, even his categorization in the school, because of, the testing protocols at that time. And she made sure to overly advocate for him. She made it her business to take advantage of half of her students being on virtual and him being in person, and putting that extra time in with him. During IEP meetings, she would make sure to let everybody on the team know that maybe his teacher next year won't have as much patience as she does. So she wants to make sure that all of his he can get whatever he needs at this time, because she knows he needs it, so that it won't be such a fight next year. So she did a service to him, and then a service to me as the parent, knowing that IEP meetings are not the greatest sometimes. So just going above and beyond with that advocating. The same with my daughter. We had a teacher who went above and beyond with advocating. Here in Florida, there was a test that all students had to take, and even if you were passing in every class, if you failed a particular portion of that test, they would keep you back. But we had such a great team that understood the needs of my child, and they understood that she could do it, that they made sure to not hold her back that grade year. So, just going above and beyond, having that relationship with not only the student, but the parent as well. I know sometimes that's difficult, for a lot of educators to get that experience with the parents, but the parents who are showing that they want to be involved and they want to learn and listen and have that connection, build that bond. So those are the things that I appreciate with educators who are working with my children.
Thank you, Maria. I wanted to do a slight shift now and talk about the transition into adulthood. This is an area that I think is difficult for many individuals, their family members, and it's difficult for the professionals who are trying to do that work as well. I think it's, broadly speaking, an under-researched, under-supported area in our field. So I'd like to talk about that. Can we start with Will? What recommendations, Will, do you have for professionals who are trying to support students on the autism spectrum as they are transitioning into adulthood?
I think I think you also have to like look at this with two paths. Are there people with disabilities, specifically on the autism spectrum, that are looking to go the college post-secondary education route, or are they going to go look at going straight into the workforce? And this kind of starts in understanding kind of from your IEP team in high school, your transition support teachers, if school districts have them, and not all school districts and individual schools, I think, like have them. From what I've personally experienced and have talked with people that are in the special education field, this also starts with people, just teachers at the high school level, allowing students on the autism spectrum to become self-determined, to go carve their own path. If they want to go out to the college level, if they want to go for a 4-year degree program, look at maybe help them going a traditional degree program path, or helping do the research for like a college autism program that exists to help students like with disabilities get the additional executive functioning supports. And one of the things that we have to like look at that with professionals is understand that people on the autism spectrum are having some other executive functioning or time management issues. Like, this is something that we have to, I think, acknowledge, have this deeply in the work. As also, if you're thinking of someone going from professional route with transitioning a person on the autism spectrum, like, we have to acknowledge as well that more than a quarter of people on the autism spectrum are living at the lines of poverty and trying to avoid them getting onto that path that they're able to, by looking, if they want to go work, what are the skills and assessments that they have, and also facing the larger issue, which is still illegal in some states, where people with disabilities and on the autism spectrum can be taken advantage of and paid sub minimum wage and not have the full opportunity to work and be in the community, like Lois Curtis has done. We have to think of those things and understand that it's going to be an individualized path. We have to develop, working with our systems, with employment specialists, vocational rehabilitation people, businesses, to look at person-centered planning, which allows to identify as a person with a disability and autism's strengths, what they like to do, and build a plan from there.
Thank you, Will. Alex, you shared that you had some really wonderful teachers in high school. Can you talk about, their role, or what helped you and your experience as you were getting ready to leave high school?
Yes, I would like to talk about that. And then also one more thing after that, if that's okay, Melanie. I was in a high school that was a college preparatory high school. So there was the assumption that we would all go to college, and there's very high expectations in my high school to do so. So I took a lot of AP classes, a lot of classes that they explicitly told us, which I appreciated, would go towards our university allotment of credits, which was helpful for that transition. And there were people, we had one class in my literature, which did life skills. Like, this was a college preparatory, but he specifically said, all of y'all don't know basic things about washing your clothes, changing a tire, finding like the medical coverage, if that's something you're interested in, making sure you have support systems. What affinity groups would you like to go to? So he took the time. I'm not talking about literature or Shakespeare or any of those things that I don't know anything about anymore. But I was able to know basic things about how to be an adult human, and it was provided to everybody, which I appreciated. And And I felt like that was really useful for me to have explicit instruction in pieces that people often assume we just know how to do. And that was extremely helpful. I also had teachers who checked up on me after I left. So I was on an IEP again, I was late diagnosed, so I didn't have any of those supports, but I had teachers who checked up on me once I got there. And I also had an extremely supportive family who allowed me to, if the dorms were too much of a sensory experience for me, which they were, being around all those people and all those noises, I could go home and I could rest at home. The second part that I wanted to say, and I just want to thank Will for calling out a lot of the things that are really important about the supports that are needed, and how autistic individuals and disabled individuals are taken advantage of. Thank you, Will, for explicitly stating that. I also want to put some emphasis on mental health. In my experience as a family member, we often think about employment independence, but we don't think about the mental health of that individual. And so I think we also want to think about, as I transition away, possibly away from home, possibly into a college or higher ed institution, possibly into a job where schedules are changing, where there's lots of different expectations, different environments, lots of contingencies in those spaces. Do those individuals have access to counseling or supports around friends or outside support systems? Do they have affinity groups that they can go to? There's privilege in saying all of those things. And are we connecting with those individuals about their mental health? We know that autistic individuals, the second leading cause of death is suicide. That's a huge issue in this community. And what are we doing in education early on to make sure that we're thinking about autistic mental health and autistic mental health literacy, so that individuals can know about how to do proactive rather than reactive care for a lot of these individuals, because we don't want to lose anyone else to a suicide, and we want to make sure that we're keeping people safe, not only in their long-term independence goals, but also in their heart and mind.
I just want to piggyback off of that as the friendly neighborhood therapist. We do have to put a focus on that. And I think that it has to start earlier than the transition planning in high school. I work with schools every day on this. It needs to start, before the kids are even entering, kindergarten and things of that nature, being aware of their feelings and their emotions and knowing that it is okay to feel whatever that they are feeling. A lot of times we shy away, especially in the school system, from what they call big emotions. So your sadness, you're mad, things of that nature. But those are normal feelings to have. We're not always going to be happy, so having children shy away from those feelings then in turn teaches them that, I can't, share these feelings. And for autistic individuals, having to then mask on top of masking, and then for our Black autistic individuals on top of code switching and things of that nature, it is a lot to be trying to maneuver and understand that I can't feel what I'm feeling because it may make you uncomfortable. And that's really what's happening with a lot of our autistic youth. You don't like the way I'm feeling, so then I'm just not going to say anything about it. And then who's going to help me deal with it, or how do I deal with it if nobody's ever talked to me about emotional regulation in my feelings? So for me, an emphasis does need to be placed upon that, because there are so many transitions happening prior to even getting to high school to think about career or college and things of that nature. Transitioning from elementary to middle school is a giant shift, right? So there are so many transitions that happen that we need to be placing an emphasis on, even if it's just social, emotional learning and literacy, and helping our students with that.
Thank you all so much. Katie, I know your family member is still very young, but what supports do you think would be helpful? And what information are you hoping will be provided to you and your family and your loved one?
The thing that I feel like would be most helpful, and at least I know for me is helpful being a professional who is autistic or not autistic in the field, is just listening to autistic folks in the autistic community and just being upfront and asking, what is it that you all felt, kind of similar to what we're doing right now, what is it that you all felt was most beneficial for your transition? And then considering how we can integrate that and individualize that with the students that we're working with. So in my instance, there's a lot that I've learned thus far, you know, throughout my education, and then also while being a listener in different autistic communities. There's a lot that I have learned from those who are going through that transition, and a lot that I've learned from the autistic students that I've had who were themselves going through the transition out of high school into college, workforce, trade school, etc. There's a lot that I've learned from them that I feel like I can consider once my family member gets to the age of one of the major transitions. Of course, like from grade to grade, even that is a transition. So we a lot of times have talks about, you know, next year, thankfully, you know, since it is a bilingual class, he's with the same group of kids every year. But even now, he's really excited about going to junior high. And yes, in the back of my mind, I'm terrified. I'm thinking of every single little thing that could go wrong. I'm thinking of, you know, just when I was in junior high, that was terrifying. And, you know, he's so excited for it. And so thus far, I've just been trying to make sure to let him know wholly that I am here for him, and I'm here to talk to him. I'm here to listen if he needs it. And I really hope and encourage the professionals who are working with him, his educators, and also other educators, to just be doing the same thing, listening both to their autistic students and then also other individuals in the autistic community.
Thank you all so much. We're getting close to being 10 minutes out from the end of today's talk. So this will be our final question. And it's very broad, but so we've been talking today from all of our dual perspectives, you know, as parents, as siblings, as autistic people, or folks on the spectrum. And what challenges or opportunities has this dual perspective, these intersecting identities, brought to you in your life or your work? And we can start with Alex.
So I have two perspectives. The first is the negative, so I'll end with a positive. As an autistic person, as a sibling to an autistic individual, I do feel a sense of advocacy in the work that I do. I feel like it's important to me to get, just to be an advocate in the community. But this can be extremely difficult and disheartening, especially when advocacy is met with disapproval and disregard. Because I'm a person who is well-spoken and can mask very well, I'm often taken not very seriously and or told that I'm not really anything, that I'm just neurotypical and I should stop what I'm doing. So on the flip side, though, I know that my late diagnosis has given me the ability to explain and understand myself more fully, to have the opportunity, and like Maria said, the privilege to be able to say that I'm autistic and I can be a part of a community, and that type of identity is invaluable to me. So I view it as something that is bittersweet. I love the opportunities that I have within the community, but by no means is it easy to inhabit multiple spaces, to be a sibling, to be a professional, and to be an autistic individual. And it's something that I continually try to learn and grow and try to unlearn a lot of the things I was taught about disability as well. So I think it's a constant learning and growing process that I don't think I'll ever have an ending point or like, I'm done. I've learned everything I need to know.
Maria?
I'll do two as well and start with a negative and then end with a positive. The negative aspect is that as a person with the multiple identities, a lot of times those that I'm advocating for, when I walk in the space to advocate for them, I am met with the same challenges that they have been met with. Most likely, racism and things of that nature, because if they're experiencing that and they're telling their story, it is oftentimes difficult for me to hear as well as a Black person. Also as a parent who has autistic children, and to go into a room and see how they're treating this particular student, that also is difficult. But on the flip side, as a Black autistic woman raising Black autistic children, I have the ability to really understand my clients and their perspectives, and to go in to the settings as also a professional who has a clinical license to talk to educators and kind of bridge that gap for my clients. A lot of times I do lead with my resume or my CV, just to get that respect in the room, but it also bridges that gap for those that I'm talking with, being the school staff, and then they understand, okay, well, she knows what she's talking about, and it makes it easier for my clients. So in that aspect, I will take the brunt of it for my clients so they don't have to experience that, because I do have an advocate that comes in when I'm going in with my children, and she does the same for me. So I appreciate that. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you, Maria. Will?
Yeah, so just like two things and two roles that I always have thought about as someone who has worked in disability services in higher education. There's always a difference with me being the strong self-advocate in me and being someone that works for the system. And for myself, from being a strong national college student disability advocate at Salisbury University within the past few years before I've transitioned to this professional role, I was someone that would go and try to change policies and systems as an advocate by coming through a lens of ableism, which is there's always social prejudice and societal prejudice against people and persons with disabilities, and would call things right out and right away. And as I've transitioned to more of a professional role, one of the things that I've had to do is acknowledge is that I've had to work for where the system is, that I understand through the lens that ableism does exist, but I can't always like call things out, because people don't always want to hear it or change the system, and aren't ready for this, and are scared of people trying to push this over by stepping over onto someone else, when I definitely see it needs to be changed. And it kind of, at times I realize that like I'm more now trailblazing for others that are experiencing this and have been on the other side, that's going to pave and carve a path for others.
Thank you, Will. Katie?
Yeah, so when I think of I'll also start with kind of more of a challenge that having the dual identities has brought. Not as much, I feel, has affected much of my professional life, but as for my personal life, just having my family member, when I go into different, K-12 schools and see ableism persist, and see different, unfortunately, injustices inflicted upon students, both neurotypical and neurodivergent. I feel like that does give me a sense of fright, and it scares me for my family member. However, in turn of taking that feeling, that does give me the drive to make sure that I am doing what I can to disrupt that. And, you know, just continuing the work that I do. And then as for me getting diagnosed with ADHD, you know, 3 years into my PhD program, I feel like being in the field and then also being surrounded by people who kind of come from the same perspective as I do, I feel like that's made the transition for me personally a lot easier. I feel like being in a field that focuses on developmental disabilities and then eventually getting diagnosed with ADHD, I feel like it's helped me learn a lot more about myself than I would have had before. I feel like if I were in a different field.
Thank you all so much for sharing your stories and your experiences. This has been really amazing. We have a few minutes left. I see one question in the chat. I'll go ahead and read this out. This one is directed to you, Maria. They said, "Thank you for sharing the cultural perspective, Maria. How do we help our Black and Brown parents accept the diagnosis when given?"
This is a question I get a lot. I think that if we're talking about within the school system and even medical diagnosis, there is not a lot of information given to parents. In the school system, when the whole process starts with RTI and then all of the evaluations and things of that nature, parents are not explained what this is for. And then when you're looking at the Black and Brown community, and I can only really speak for the Black community here, there are so many stigmas within and outside of our community when it comes to diagnosis. A lot of times, Black parents are parenting based out of survival mode because they know what it's like to navigate society as a Black adult. So they're thinking that my child is already a Black male or a Black female, and they have to walk around with those two identities. Now add in an identity of disability, and what is that going to do for my child? So because the information doesn't get to our community, and there's so much shame and guilt that surrounds this identity when it comes to your child getting this diagnosis, and did I do something wrong? And, you know, what if, and there's no explanation. Of course, there may be parents who are not quite accepting of that, especially if their child does not have a lot of high support needs. So they're like, well, they've been doing just fine this time. So you're trying to now give them this label, and how are we now supposed to navigate society? There's a lack of information, and we're not bridging that gap, unfortunately. So it starts really with a lot of psychoeducation with the parents and letting them know the benefits to your child being able to get this categorization or this diagnosis, and now get the supports that they need to help them in school. So starting with the psychoeducation, and I know sometimes that is, you know, above and beyond what our job description says, but it really does help a lot of families when they can have a sit-down explanation of what is going on. For me, myself, I had to immerse myself in everything just to understand all of the intricate working pieces of what's going on with special education. You know, when it came to my daughter, my oldest, I had to go above and beyond. And a lot of Black parents do not have the time to do that. That is a privilege that I have. So yeah, I would say, you know, starting with the psychoeducation and not trying to, you know, shame them or berate them into needing it, because there are so many things that could be going on that you're not aware of that is giving that hindrance. So just starting from a simple conversation.
Thank you, Maria. We are at time, but we have one more question. Panelists, are you comfortable staying for 2 more minutes? Okay, this question is to Alex. Alex, what are your thoughts or suggestions between balancing the concept of ableism between students and as a professional with a disability?
Oof, that's a good question. Wow, balancing ableism. I personally think we have, again, like I said, a lot to unlearn as professionals, especially in the special education field. The field is rife with a medical model, which looks at fixing and changing individuals and placing the blame on individuals, rather than looking at more affirming ways of looking at that individual, like the social model, neurodiversity paradigm. I mean, there's so many, you can deep dive into these things. But I think we also have to understand, and I'm just going to reiterate what Maria said, because I loved it so much, that it's a privilege to have that diagnosis to get the supports that you need. So you have to work within each model to make sure that you get the services that you need to be able to live your life to the best of your ability. And you have to think about how, and as a professional, how am I affirming and creating spaces of safety and authenticity and welcome for those students, and actively, just like there's a lot of information about being an anti-racist teacher, we need to look about how can we be more than just that? How can we be anti-ableist? Because students hold multiple identities. And again, like Maria said, there's a lot of students who do not have that diagnosis. And so we need to assume, again, I'm bringing in lots of different things like trauma-informed or trauma-responsive practices, where there's the assumption here that, we know that individuals experience wide ranges of trauma. Let's assume that we have students in our spaces, because we know that we do, that are autistic or do have disabilities. And so let's try to make spaces that include them, that affirm them. So it's a hard thing to walk. It's something that I'm still navigating, of how do I advocate for kind of tackling some of these ableist ideals, not only in K-12 education, but in higher ed, while also still having enough energy for myself to also be a human and a student and a wife and a sister and all of those things. And if anybody has the magical ingredients to that balance, please let me know. I'd love to have your advice on that. But again, it's just a constant learning and unlearning, just being really critical and enhancing your critical consciousness about what does it mean to be an anti-ableist educator, anti-ableist professional.
You all are amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your thoughts and your expertise with us. This was really wonderful. We have a lot of comments in the chat thanking you all, and we will let everyone be free. So thank you all so much, and thank you to everyone who attended as well. We hope this was, we have a question about contact information. Panelists, if you'd like to drop whatever information in the chat, please go ahead and do that. And we'll hang on just for a couple minutes for folks who want to do that.
And I also want to let everybody know that we at Autism in Black have our annual conference. We always invite teachers to learn. It'll be in April, but we are also accepting speaker proposals. So if anybody's interested in being a speaker for the Autism in Black conference, I'll drop that information in the chat as well.
Thank you, Maria. All right, I think I'm going to close this in 1 more minute. Yes, thank you, Dr. Jimenez. This meeting is recorded and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. I think I should be able to email all of the folks who attended today with a link to that. I'll look into that. If not, keep an eye out on DADD social media and it'll be shared there eventually. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.